welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hey, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessica, and I'm here with the author Lindy Ryan, who I was very excited to see has a second installation of so the first book is Bless Your Heart, and this one is Another Fine Mess. The series as a whole, is it Bless Your Heart, or do you have like a specific name?
No, it's the Bless Your Heart series.
The Bless Your Heart series. Okay. It's super, super fun. It's something I definitely crave as a original Buffy fan. And it's just this, it's just a really fun story about family, but also about fighting the supernatural and who you can trust and lineage and secrets, all the stuff that you want in a book, or at least that I want in a book. So, first of all, welcome. Very happy to have you. So, with the success of Bless Your Heart, I have to say, before we dive into talking about the new book, did you always know that this was going to be a series for you?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. It's great
You're
to be here.
welcome.
I don't know if I did or not. It's like I think sometimes I thought it would be a series, sometimes I thought it would be a standalone, and things, have a way of bouncing back and forth, especially on the first book. But it became very apparent to myself, my editor, my readers, that with the end of Bless Your Heart, there was a lot more story for the Evans women to be told. So now we've moved into series territory, which is a lot of fun because I get to work with each character and each of their journeys and each of their legacies, as well as their overall kind of family dynamics. So it's great to spend more time with these characters for sure.
And I think like one of the things that I enjoy about it is just that it's kind of set in like is it like the late 90s?
Yeah, it's set in pretty much fall of like 98.
So that was, gosh, I think I was a sophomore in college, fall of 98. So there's definitely some nostalgic feels there. And, I think like I've spoken to other authors, especially horror authors, about when you're writing a book and setting it in a certain time period, obviously cell phones and, smartphones and access to these things change the world and how everybody's going to interact with each other. This is such a good time period to be setting a suspense or horror in, because while we know for anybody who saw Scream knows that cell phones were starting to become the more popular form of interacting with one another. It was not that everybody had them. Even the internet, you could look things up, but everything was kind of just starting out. And when you have a character like Luna, who is a teenager at this point, and she's sort of straddling between her mother's legacy and her grandmother's and great-grandmother's legacy, it's interesting to kind of use that time period and see how it all plays out. So I guess like that's one thing I was curious about. Why the 90s for you?
Well, I think I'm a 90s girl, right, at heart, and there's no better decade. And I was pretty close to Luna's age at the time that the story is set. I was about Luna's age. Luna's very kind of inspired by my teen self, just like all the Evans women are inspired by my family members and my grandmothers. But, I think it does double duty. There's the nostalgia of the late 90s. I mean, I got my first cell phone. I think I was like a junior in high school, and it was one of those Nokia bricks. But previous to that, my mom had given me a pager for my birthday. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. I've got a pager. I didn't realize that it was an electronic leash, right? That pager went off. I had to better have some quarters on me so I could call home.
100%. People do not understand that you needed those quarters.
No, it's great. And, my son just turned 18 and he has no concept of life pre. As a matter of fact, he went skydiving for his birthday and can't figure out how to send me the video because on a thumb drive, ancient tech for today's teens. But, I love the 90s. That was when I grew up. That was my heyday. And I love the nostalgia of that. But there's also a lot of isolation in this town and for these women. And so I also kind of wanted to build a world that kind of spoke to that isolation that they feel from each other, from the world at large, that the town is kind of set apart. And so taking technology away, was a meaningful and very practical step toward, pulling that out. And another fine mess, Lenore Evans has to interact with the fax machine, right? So the good old days of faxes. But my mom had a fax at home and I loved playing with it. So it was like a secret love for me too. So I think there's a lot of the nostalgic references in the Bless Your Heart world, whether it's the music they're listening to, what's on the television at the time, what the fashion is, and social, what was happening in the world at that time, but also the day-to-day stuff, right? We didn't have cell phones. Pagers. Yeah, I didn't really go into pagers, but we didn't have the internet, and that all that goes into Luna, and as she's trying to kind of dig through some of her legacy and some of the truth of these folklore and fairy tale and legends passed down. I still remember the horror of having to go to the library and dig around and research everything. So that tactile, working with microfiche, all that fun stuff, I thought, really contributed to the entire atmosphere of the world as well. So no cell phones for Luna.
Yeah, and I think I like that she is in this time and place, but I also just love the family as a whole because that's a huge theme that's kind of running through this. I don't want to spoil it for people who did not read the first book, but she's in a very vulnerable place, as is Lenore at the end of that last book. There are big changes, not just in the town itself, but in their family. And, they have to move on, quote unquote, but you can't move on from the things that had happened and the revelations. I think the book opens with something that's at first like, you're like, wait a second, how and why and what is going on? But it's as much of a coming, I don't want to even say coming of age, but like a coming of understanding for Luna as it is for Lenore, because you know that the Evans women, they run this funeral home, and you know that they are tasked with keeping the dead rested. But at the same time, when you're so entrenched in that world, it becomes murky. One of the things I love, and one of the things I'd love to ask is, how apparent was the lore when these characters started coming about for you? Did you know whose story was over? Did you just kind of trip into the next phase of it?
It's always really fun to try to talk about a sequel and slip around the spoilers of the first book. So when I know the character arcs for all four of the Evans women and some of the supporting characters, and there are past generations of Evans women whose stories also need to be told. So it's this really interesting timeline problem of getting everything on the page, keeping everyone around to tell their story, fulfill, their arc. My grandmothers are both gone. So I guess I have kind of this, I always talk about Bless Your Heart in the world in the series as an exorcism, like being able to spend more time with my grandmothers who have gone and write them back to life. And it was kind of a catharsis for me to be able to give them different endings, to say goodbye to them. So I know that some of these characters may not make it to the end of the series, and that's okay, because sometimes saying goodbye, letting go is the right thing to do. And I think there are some characters in this world who very much deserve peace and very much deserve rest as well. So it's, you want to do what's best for the character inside the story, but also, I love all these women and all these characters and I want to keep them around. And there's so much mythology and so much folklore that goes into it. And there's a ton of real history. So I'm digging back in the trenches of pre-Dracula vampire lore to bring the Strigoi back. And then, this small town is very heavily inspired by my actual small town, hometown in Texas, which has a tremendous, significant historical imprint on today, our country today as we know it, in our oil industry and everything. So there's a lot of real history that kind of helps pave the path. There's a lot of the mythology and folklore that helps kind of set some boundaries. And then the Evans women are just running amok inside the confines that they have and pushing their own boundaries. So, I think some of these things evolve. Sometimes the characters surprise me and they do what they want to do. And sometimes I have to keep them on their path. But I like the organic nature of it and the restlessness of the series too. So it's tried to keep everybody together, herding cats, but staying inside the world that we all live in. I like to pretend I'm an Evans woman. So we all have to kind of, exist together in whatever way that looks like. And, family is found, not always blood family too. So being able to kind of open your arms to that is another trick. But I think I like the way it's going so far. And I think, the Evans women are coming with me. So we're doing well.
Do you do a lot of plotting then?
I am getting better at plotting.
You don't have to. This is wonderful. You
I
do such a good job.
I think, the Bless Your Heart series has been different than anything I worked on before because it's so inspired by real people and real events that it has its own momentum. And so when the plotting happens, it's very clear and very obvious where I need things to go. And in terms of the four Evans women and some of their friends, their journeys are very apparent. So sometimes it's just a matter of moving them, toward those endpoints cohesively. And then sometimes, pushing them past an end and then reeling back a little bit. Because luckily, when you're writing with the supernatural, you have the freedom to break some rules. And so I do a fair amount of that too. But I do definitely plot pretty, but it's pretty loose. I don't want to box myself in because, sometimes Ducey says, no, we're doing something else. Or Lenore says, I'd rather not. And we do something else. So it's definitely a fair amount of both. A lot of research, less plotting, if that makes sense. So that's kind of my typical method.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And I think that also just kind of brings me to just sort of how you approach mythology and how much research you do to prepare for everything.
Quite a bit. I mean, I'm a professor by day, so research is just part of me. I have to know or feel like I know something, and those notes become, sometimes addictive. Like I I need to know, and I have to dig and dig and dig. So when it comes to the real world, that the Evanses live in, that especially the history in Texas, a substantial amount of research. In fact, I just returned from Texas where I was touring museums and meeting with historians and getting some of my I need to know the truth just enough so I can mess it all up, right, and to fit it to my needs. And then I do a lot of reading. I'm very visual. I'm a very visual person. So I have cork boards and whiteboards and posters and all of these things that also kind of support the research. And then, as an odd method person, I have a lot of tools. So I have mortuary instruments that I purchased. So I know exactly how Ducey's trocar works. I actually have a copy of I think it's the New York Times from 1902 when an important event in the past happened in Eamon's world. So I'm really heavily into the research, but maybe 50% of what I research makes it into a story. A lot of it's just cool context and texture. But yeah, it's a lot. But it makes my little academic heart very happy. So
Were you inspired by any particular series or anything to write this? I mean, obviously, it sounds like it's a very personal story, and it sounds, like your family really is in this story. But as a fan of the supernatural myself and somebody, who probably just would have, I mean, would have imagined that I would have loved to be fighting the supernatural at that age. But when you really think about it, you always assume that you're going to be the person who's going to make it, and you don't know that. But as somebody whose kind of imagination was set alight by the idea of women fighting the supernatural, I am curious what some of your inspiration might have been.
I always love to hear what readers or, people will say that, the book or the world of this series reminds them of. I mean, I am a huge reader, but I don't tend to read a lot of series in general. And I don't tend to read a lot of series that kind of align to the bless your heart, thematically. So I don't know. I mean, I definitely spent a lot of time reading Laurel K. Hamilton, both her Mary Gentry series and her Anita Blake series. Uh, but it's been 20 years since I read a lot of those books. I definitely grew up on Anne Rice. So that was one series that I love. And I just kind of reread it. It's very different rereading the Vampire Chronicles as an adult woman versus as a teenage girl. But I hear comparisons to like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I have never not once seen an episode of Buffy. I did watch the movie with the Christy Swanson movie, which is definitely in my all-time, top favorite movies ever. But I've never seen a lot of the comps. And I do it intentionally because I don't, want to accidentally borrow or accidentally have my world infiltrated by someone else's world. So if I hear something that, somebody compares this series to, I actively stay away from it because I want to make sure I'm creating my own authentic original world. So I haven't seen Buffy. I haven't seen 6 Feet Under. I haven't seen a lot of those things, and I haven't read. I've never read the Sookie Stackhouse series. I've just kind of, it's not my bread and butter as a reader, which is ironic, I guess, because sometimes you think what you write is similar to what you read, and sometimes it is, but often it's not. And this Bless Your Heart is so deeply, deeply personal that I just pull all the inspiration from the core of me. And if that core is inspired by, my 90s loves, then that definitely comes out on the page. But I really don't have a series that I kind of am attached to that I would say as an inspirational series beyond, really beyond Anne Rice.
So, what is next for the Evans women? Can you say?
I cannot, but there is more. I definitely want to get to the root of what set the Evans women world on fire. And I guess that's the biggest, like, it's not hook I can give. But there is more to come for the Evans women, past, present, and future. So I hope everyone will follow along. And as soon as I can tell everyone what that's going to be, I absolutely will. But I have a new book coming in February, also from Minotaur, that is a standalone suburban slasher. It's called Dollface. We pitched it as Barbie meets Scream. So speaking of that 90s nostalgia, it is not set in the 90s, but it is very nostalgic to, our opening days of the new neo slashers, as well as, all the stuff we know and love and remember from the 90s.
That's so funny. So, I mean, I do have to ask then, what is your bread and butter as a reader?
Oh my gosh. I walk myself right into this, don't I? I don't know. I read a little bit of everything. I definitely read horror. I'm mostly a horror girl through and through. I read a lot of nonfiction because I'm a nerd. Um, I reread the same books over and over again. I have that tick. I know a lot of readers do, and I love reading. But I love reading my friends and my colleagues and peers in the horror space. There are some fantastic voices in horror today, so I love supporting the community and championing work, especially by women and underrepresented authors in the genre. But I also really love reading cozy stuff. I've gotten really into cozy lately. Like the world's a little scary, even for scary girls. So, reading a lot of cozy stuff. And I just was at a bookstore. I was at Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas, which is the coolest indie genre shop, and picked up 2 new books that are both cozies from the perspective of animals. I've discovered that's something I really love right now. So, I read Katrina Ward's Last House on Needless Street, and oh my gosh, I was just talking about another animal narrator. Oh, Kira Jane Buxton's Hollow Kingdom is probably one of my favorite horror adjacent books, being a kind of a zombie story told from the perspective of the animals left behind in the wake of our own human disaster. So I guess I love quirky stuff. I love interesting narrators, and I love books that make me feel and make me think and that speak to my personal horrors. And Josh Malerman's Daphne will forever go down as one of the scariest books I've ever read
One of
because
my
he really
favorites. I have to say, that book was by far one of my favorites of his. And I think about it a lot.
do too. Every time I see a denim jacket, which are back in style suddenly, all I can think of is, oh shit, there's Daphne. I always said my
Don't think
favorite.
about her.
I know, don't
Think
just
about
don't.
her.
You guys
That's
change the
bad.
topic real fast. But
Yeah, let's not talk about
I,
Daphne.
I know my always said my favorite Josh Malerman book was Pearl. I love The Day of the Pig. And I love, weird animal, unreliable, scary narrators, which tracks totally for me. I did, read that other one that shan't be talked about, and definitely loved it because I'm an anxiety monster. So, reading that manifested was, particularly scary personally. So yeah, some of my favorite recs. So
Thank you so much. Check out Bless Your Heart and Another Fine Mess. It's really interesting because really talking more about what happens in this book is just so many spoilers that I want to talk around them, but it's good. You should read it. It's very, very good.
well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You too. This was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast, and we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.